he knew I would like to take actual film of high grading, in the sense of, as you know, it's called cooking a button, where they take the ore, which is pretty pure, and boil it in such a way that the differences in expansion result in the rock breaking from the ore, and they get it. Then they then in fact refine it, which is they call cooking a button, because you get a gold button as a result. Oh, they're yay big. And he said he could actually arrange filming it. The CBC this was still the days of film. So I approached the CBC, and they said, yeah, as long as you do it on your holidays. They weren't willing to pay for sending me up there, because I was producing the news. And so on my holidays, I was all set to go when they phoned me and said, we've changed our mind. So I went down to the Toronto Star and sold them on the idea of doing it for the Toronto Star. And they hired Hondrick said, go ahead. No, sorry, I talked first to Charles Templeton. He was that time the managing editor. And Templeton said, go ahead. And we had rented the car and we're on our way. We're ready to go when the CBC said, we won't let you byline. And I couldn't believe this, but they said this, it's too political, they said. So Hondrick said, well, who do you know at the Star? And I said, well, Roy Shields, he's the TV critic. So Roy joined us. And when we arrived in Timmins, we bought an incredible amount of alcohol, 80 bottles, almost all of it rye. And Mo phoned all his high grading supposed friends. But they had been willing to do it when it was with the CBC. But when Roy Shields, I signed at a motel as working in insurance. Mo, everybody knew anyway. But Shields made the mistake of, where do you work? Toronto Star. And that revealed what we were really doing. So we proposed a big party, and it was going to be outdoors, and it was in Schumacher, actually, which is on the Matagami River, some kind of park, I think. And for some reason, we had a place to park, and we had a boat, where there was a boat there that we could use to row across the river to where we were meeting them. Don't know why that was, but it was partly to keep it isolated, I think. And everything was fine, big party, everything going fine, when somebody called Big Amy. Oh, first they got Roy to talk about his swimming. He claimed he was a marathon swimmer. So they talked him into swimming the river. Well, it was October, and I don't think he would have survived. Then next, somebody named Big Amy, who was 6'6", picked me up. His hand just cracked my cheekbones, and then he put his arms around my waist and just crushed my rib cage, and I passed out. And he was throwing me in the river when Mo got him, and Mo knocked him, laid him out, threw me into the boat, pushed the boat out, and rowed across, picked Shields out of the water and dumped him in the boat, rowed to the other side, and we got into the car and off we drove. And we had, I think, the only boat we were using. They'd come in some other way. So we got away. And I went down to the, I had to go to hospital. And the hospital recommended that I go to, they were afraid of the broken ribs puncturing my lungs. So they sent me to the Wellesley, actually. I went in by plane. Mo drove me out to the airport instead of by Star paid for it. So I flew down to the Wellesley. And I had given Shields all the background to write the stuff. And it, in fact, Ghost written a whole series of articles, 3, I think. But Shields developed it. Mo found for him a guy called Little Jimmy. Little Jimmy actually agreed to testify. Now, I think the reason Little Jimmy agreed to it was to buy the next drink. But anyway, they ended up bringing Little Jimmy back to Toronto. And they put him up in a hotel called the Selby on Sherbourne Street. And when I heard about it, I was in the hospital and they phoned me. I said, that's the worst place in the world. You can do it. All Northern Ontario, a lot of Northern Ontario people hang out in the Selby. And they said, well, okay. So they took him, began bringing booze up to him and meals and giving him, TV and hoping that he wouldn't go to the hotel, which was a fatal error. And so the first thing he did was go down to the beer parlor, and suddenly we found he'd disappeared. And Mo met him about 2 months later. They had scared him off. And he said, I'll never talk about anything to anybody. And that was at which point Templeton said, you guys don't have, when he disappeared, Templeton had to go and tell Hondrick what he was doing. And it turned out that he was planning to use the story in his bid for the Liberal leadership in Ontario, which he ran for the leadership later in '64. And lost, came close. And Hondrick was very irritated by this because he hadn't signed for it. And when Templeton said, I'm not paying you, I immediately phoned a friend of mine named Arthur Maloney, who was a very prominent lawyer. Arthur had been a buddy for many years. And Arthur wrote a letter to Hondrick saying, we are suing. Hondrick phoned me and said, come down. I said, I'm still in the hospital. He said, well, take a cab, come on. So I came down. Hondrick said, I accept your story. I will pay you $6,000 was the deal. 3 for Mo Keys, 3 for me. And I said, Mo will pick up the checks. Unfortunately, he wrote a joint check to Mo Keys and me. And Mo picked it up and wrote both signatures, and I never saw any of it. And didn't see Mo for quite a while.